1460 WVOX.
Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Thanks for tuning in today. And if you hear me opening the show, it is because we are minus not only Peter Moses, but the calm and the storm, John the Man Sharan. They are both off today. So if you hear me kind of stumble and mumble through the show, it's because I don't have their guidance, but that's okay. We're in good hands because our in-studio guest is Jordan El-Haj, and Jordan is a labor lawyer. And the reason why Jordan is here today is because we're going to talk about the Janus Decision. And if people out there do not know what the Janus Decision is, then y'all better read up about it because it's got far-reaching implications, not only for employers, but for union employees. Now, a little more about Jordan. Jordan has 15 years of experience with labor unions. He was the chief officer of several labor unions. He's a Fordham Law School graduate with the Master's Business Administration, and he has a practice in White Plains. So he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. Now, I just want to start out with a little bit of background on the Janus Decision. The Janus Decision is the result of a lawsuit by an AFSCME employee who is or was a child care support worker in Illinois. Mark Janus belonged to that union, and he was making $71,000 a year. Mark Janus, I think on or about 2017, decided that he did not want to pay union dues anymore because the union that he belonged to contributed to political causes that he was not in tune with. And he also felt that when he was first employed at the place where he worked, that he was not given the option about whether or not he wanted to contribute to those political causes. So, make a long story short, or actually in this case a short story long, that case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And as of, I believe it's June 27th, I may be off a day or two, Supreme Court ruled that if you are a public sector union employee, you do not have to pay dues. You are entitled to the union protection of the organization, of the union that you are enrolled with, but you don't have to pay them anything. And it almost seems that this is a way to decimate unions. This is a way to weaken unions because unions, I mean, look, unions need money. Unions need money for arbitration. Unions need money to contribute to political causes. Unions need money to keep going. And this, on the surface, would appear to be a way to weaken the unions. Now, let's hear Jordan's interpretation of that decision. Jordan, what do you think?
So just to clarify the decision a little bit, what Mr. Janus was objecting to was not the payment of the dues going toward political and ideological causes, because that had already been decided by the Supreme Court in a previous decision. What he was objecting to was paying any union dues whatsoever. And he was saying that, I don't have to pay anything to the union if that money is going to some political cause that I don't believe in. But, I don't even like the union I'm in at all, and I don't want to pay anything. And because he's works in for an employer that is represented by AFSCME in this case, he's still entitled to all the benefits of the union contract. So the real debate in on the street debate, if you would call it that, is, hey, if somebody is protected by a union contract, should they be required to pay for the representation that the union incurs, the cost that the union incurs to bring that representation there, because he's still entitled to the wage increases in the contract, the medical benefits, the pension benefits, and protection if he loses his job. And he's saying, well, I still don't like the union. Don't make me pay. It's a violation of my First Amendment rights. And the Supreme Court agreed with him in this case. So what the Supreme Court said was, and this is limited to public sectors, they said, when there's a public sector employer and they have an employee that's forced to, I'm hearing some music.
Yeah, we have a few more seconds before we go to break.
Okay, so when they force an employee to pay money toward a group that they don't want to be a part of, and that group is negotiating with a public entity, it has these far-reaching implications into the budget of the state and things like that, then it's a violation of First Amendment. Okay,
and we're going to talk about, I want to get to private sectors on the other side of the break, because this has implications for the private sector unions also. So stay with us, folks, and listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. Call in 914-636-0110, 914-636-0110 for any questions or comments. See you in a few.
On WVOX.
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
We are back into our final half hour on the show. This is Westchester Eye on the Radio. I am Ardina Seward, minus Peter and John, who my boys have the day off, but our guest is Jordan El-Haj, who is a labor lawyer, an experienced labor lawyer, I might add, who's been in the game for a long time. And we are talking about the Janus decision and the implications, the far-reaching implications of the Janus decision, what it means, what you can do. So let's talk. I'd like to talk more about the private sector, because I think that if you belong to a private sector union, you're kind of heaving a sigh of relief, thinking, well, you know something, it happened to the government employees, it's happened to the cops, the teachers, people who work for the government, and it hasn't happened to us. So are private sector union members safe and kind of sitting back and watching the action happen?
I don't think that they're safe. I think something's probably coming down the road. I subscribe to the theory there's a concerted effort to undermine the union and labor movement in America. So I'm sure that on the heels of this decision, there are some intelligent lawyers working for some groups that are going to craft some argument and strategy to apply this reasoning to the private sector. There's some hurdles that they would face in trying to get the same decision applied to the private sector, but there's already a decision on the books. It's Communication Workers of America versus Beck that already holds that private sector unions can't use employee or member dues money to fund political or ideological causes that a member could object to. So in other words, a member could say, hey, I know you're spending my dues money on funding, Republicans or Democrats. I don't subscribe to that. I want you to refund me some of the money that you paid for that, and I only want to pay you for the representation. So that decision's already been made and it's been in effect a long time. The First Amendment issue has not been addressed in the private sector. But there's other legal roadblocks. I don't know if you want to get into all the legal background.
Please elaborate on
that. But, the main issue in the Janus decision was, that the employer was a government entity, and the bargaining that took place between the union and the government has, the court held, the majority held, a far-reaching effect on the citizens of the state of Illinois. The money that's spent on pensions and on wages impacts the budget, which means that other programs can't get funded. And that just doesn't exist in the private sector. It's a private business. It's their profitability. And there's also no free speech rights at work. When you're at work and an employer is paying you, you don't have a right to talk. They can tell you just keep your mouth shut, and there's really not much you can do about it. So when the government's the employer, there are different rules that apply. The government can't totally curb your speech, right? So those elements aren't available for people to attack, in the private sector. But, you can always come up with a legal argument, and, you don't really know which way the court's going to go with it. They seem to find justifications to underpin their decisions. And if you read the dissent of the Janus decision, they really attack the majority, and they say, hey, this is really just, leveraging the First Amendment in a way it wasn't designed to do, to attack unions. And you're not going to apply this reasoning to, other aspects of public employment. You're just going to do it to attack unions. So there's this dichotomy between the court right now, and I definitely see that it's a possibility that the private sector could face a similar kind of threat in the future.
Yeah, because there apparently there are private sector unions. I don't have a list in front of me, but there are private sector unions that also represent government employees. So it's kind of a hybrid. So the question is, then what happens to them? Will that kind of void the rules for the private sector union if they are also representing public sector employees?
Well, when unions in those situations are representing different groups of people, it's on a contract by contract basis. So, I might represent the employees of Stop and Shop, that's a private sector employer, and then I also might represent, employees of, Westchester County, which are public sector employees. Those two contracts are separate. So now when this decision comes down, they're not going to be able to require the people who object in the public sector to paying what's called an agency fee. They can't say, look, fine, we're not going to spend your money on these political things, but we still expended this amount of money representing you. And they say, well, I don't really care. I don't want to pay you anything. And there's nothing that the union can do in that situation to leverage or to get the money from those people who object. So you're going to have part of that group subsidizing, the people who aren't paying. But the private sector right now, their contract requires a dues payments, they're still going to have to pay the dues.
No, well, in terms of unions representing employees, there is for people who are non-union employees, they are under the umbrella of what some call corporate paternalism. And it's also a reason why apparently there's been an alleged decline in union membership. A lot of employees don't feel the need for union representation because, admittedly, human resources has gotten better. Legislation in favor of employees has gotten better, and non-union employees have a recourse, not only a recourse within the company, but also federal recourses for protection on the job. So if you're a non-union employee and you say, okay, I have a beef with the company, so I'm going to go to human resources, how does the protection in human resources contrast with representation by unions if you have a legal issue?
So this is my biggest talking point with non-union employees. They don't understand what really having a voice on the job means. So when you are in a non-union workplace, I tell people you don't have a voice on the job. You're engaged in what's glorified begging, because an employer does not have a legal obligation to listen to you. They can't discriminate against you under the law. They can't retaliate against you for engaging in protected activity, but they don't have to listen to you. So if you came in and said, hey, you know what, I'm not happy with the pay here, they could say, that's great, go find another job. But once a group of employees forms a union, they're recognized as having a union there, their employer has a legal obligation to sit down and bargain with that group of employees, which means that they cannot change any term and condition of employment without first negotiating in good faith with the employees. Now, does the negotiation always end up, in the terms that everyone wants? No, it's a negotiation. There's a give and take, but you have an active, legally protected right to have a say in what happens to you in the workplace. Human resources is not the employee's advocate. Human resource departments are in place to protect the company from getting sued to carry out the desires of the employer against the employee. And they always say it's a big happy family, but the reality is that an employer's interests and an employee's interests are always going to be in conflict, because we want to get paid as much as we can get paid. They want to make as much money as they want to make, and they're going to pay you the least amount of money possible to get you to do your job. Having a union is the only way to have some independent protection and voice on the job. So for the non-union people out there, go join a union as soon as you can.
And that being said, I'd like to read a statement by Mark Janus, who, and this was how he defended his opting out of the union. Sounds like that statement is not going to be read until we get to the other side of this break. I hear the music playing. So if you want to hear Mark Janus' statement, folks, you're going to have to tune back. You're going to have to stay with us. You're going to have to tune back in a few minutes, because we're going to a commercial. Got to sell things. Listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. Phone in 914-636-0110.
WVOX.
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Thanks for staying with us. We are into our final 10 minutes of the show. We had so much ground to cover, folks. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the Radio, and we're talking about the now infamous Janus decision, which impacts unions, the union viability, employees, income, the whole 9 yards. And our in-studio guest today is Jordan El-Haj, who is a labor attorney who is helping us sift through this sea of information. I think before the break, we were talking about non-union employees and why they choose to be non-union employees and what protection they have. And now that Mark Janus is a quasi non-union employee, I want to read a statement about his rationale as to why he did what he did. Okay, this is in his own words. He says, "In the 1980s, I worked in a government job and was not required to pay money to a union. Then I worked for a private company. When I returned to the public sector in 2007, the union automatically deducted money from my paycheck, even though I was not a union member. That's when I learned that state government in Illinois had granted AFSCME, a politically powerful government union, the power to exclusively represent more than 90% of state workers in Illinois. It turned out that I was one of millions of American workers who were forced to support a government union as a condition of employment. This is a gross violation of my First Amendment rights to free speech and freedom of association. So I've asked the U.S. Supreme Court to end this practice. I'm not anti-union. I don't begrudge anyone who wants to form a union or be part of a union. But what is unfair and unconstitutional is forcing me and millions of American workers to pay to advance policies we oppose just so we can serve our communities in our state." Now, let me tell you something. I mean, he's saying all of this about in the meantime, he was enjoying a salary of $72,000 that was helped and abetted by the union itself. So he may be out of the union. He may have opted to not pay union dues now, but if he is still there, he's still making the big bucks. Now, I want to go back to Jordan, what we were talking about before the break, about the rationale of non-union employees and why they feel protected by the company and why that may be a total misperception.
I can't understand why they feel that way. I think that people, I started my career as a union organizer, and so I spent a lot of time going out on the street, educating people about their rights, hearing their positions, and I've been involved in hundreds of union organizing drives, and to this day, I don't quite have an understanding of why people feel so connected to a company. They don't look at it as it's a business transaction. You're going there and you're providing your time, your labor, your skill set, whatever that might be. In exchange, you're getting, money from the employer. You're providing each other services. But, it seems from the employee perspective, they believe, we're one big happy family here. My boss is looking out for my best interest. They feel I think a lot of times it's driven by fear. They're afraid that the employer is going to fire them, so they just don't want to even talk about unions. But I don't really know if there's I've never heard somebody be able to articulate a very logical reason of why you don't want to have control over your working conditions. I always ask people, I say, okay, you have two choices in America. You could be an at-will employee, which your boss can do whatever they want, pretty much, except discriminate against you or retaliate against you. And they are going to make whatever decisions they want about how much to pay you, if they're going to give you health insurance, a pension, and you're going to devote your entire life to helping this person build wealth. The other choice is that you can have a say in all those things that impact your economic well-being. When I frame it like that, everyone's like, oh, no, I would like to have a say in it. It's like, okay, well, why don't you form a union then? I don't believe in unions. So I don't understand the connection, why they feel that way. I think a lot of it is fear. I think a lot of it is bad PR. You see a lot of negative publicity about unions, and I never hear anything really good. I mean, the statistics show union employees make way more money than non-union employees, and better benefits, better pensions. When people talk about public sector teachers, they're saying, oh, that's not fair. They have these great pensions. They have these great benefits. I don't have that. Well, then maybe you should all start forming unions and fighting to win those benefits where you work. But instead they say, well, if I don't have it, they shouldn't have it either. So, I think it's an emotionally driven thing that, it's unique to each individual, but they're patterns. You see some of the same arguments from each person.
There is, admittedly, there is a class divide, because if you look at the portrayal sometimes of union workers, they are caricatured. I mean, they're basically portrayed as people who are not intellectuals, people who may not come from the hippest part of town, and they are overpaid. There is an inherent bias, I think, in many cases with union workers, even to the point where there's an interesting phenomenon that is developing now with the tech sector, the Silicon Valley types, who politically are liberal, but they also see themselves as intellectuals, as thinkers, as people who are coming out of the think tank, and they have opted not to unionize. Now, that may all change down the road, because it's fine now, and the company is providing. Google is the case in point. They have liberal hours, a lot of perks, exercise breaks, the whole 9 yards. But even that can get old after a while. So I'm thinking that, things have a way of balancing out. So right now, the sentiment is anti-union. Do you think that down the road we will see a swing back in favor of the unions going forward?
Yeah, I think you'll see a swing back if things get worse. And I think they're pretty bad. If you look at the information out there, wages have been stagnant for decades, no real gains in the working class. But that doesn't seem to be enough. When unions were developing, people were working in factories and dying, and their children were there, and they weren't getting. There's no public schools, and they fought to, have workers' compensation, Social Security. All those big gains came out of, in part, by the labor movement. I think today's, employee seems to be quite content with a lot of the, working conditions that they have. But there's a pension crisis right now. I mean, most people can't put enough money away to retire. If you have children, you're young. Me. It's, you wonder how you're going to pay for their college when it's $50,000 a year for undergraduate, and I have more than one. So figuring all that stuff out isn't easy, but people seem to go with the flow. I don't see the pendulum swinging back anytime in the near future. I think they have to have some major upheaval in what they
it'll be it'll be interesting to see what happens with the coal miners union, even though that's a private union, but a lot of those guys voted for Trump, and God forbid if things get worse in that union, we'll see if they decide to speak out. We've talked a lot about workers and workers' rights, but we haven't talked about you. And if people want to contact you, how will they reach you? What is your contact information?
So I only represent working men and women. I don't represent any businesses, and it's all employment related. So if you haven't been paid correctly at work or faced discrimination, maybe wrongfully terminated, you could go online. My website's elhajlaw.com, elhaglaw.com, or you could call 914-218-6190. We're right in White Plains, and we represent employees all throughout southern New York.
Well, you heard it. Give him a call, folks. See you next week. Got a drag queen coming on the show. How about that? Angel Electra, who is not only gorgeous, but smart and fantastic. So tune in next week. Same time, same place. And have a good week.